Argo CD config management plugins. What's new in Argo CD 3.2? Plus, what's the case for bringing Argo CD and CDEvents together, all on today's episode of Argo Unpacked. I am your host, Dan Garfield. I am an Argo CD maintainer. I'm a co-founder of CodeFresh, GitOps maintainer, Argo CD, all this stuff. If you've been listening to the show, then you know all about it. If this is your first time, you're going to learn so much. Now, before we jump into bringing our guests, we're going to start off with a quick Argo tip around Argo CD CMPs. Now, what is a CMP? It's a config management plugin. Now, Argo CD, for those of you that know how it works, maybe you don't know how it works, Argo CD takes a source of truth, typically manifests from a Git repository, a Helm chart, a customization, just plain Kubernetes manifest or whatever, and it renders them into plain Kubernetes manifests. It doesn't apply Helm charts directly. It doesn't apply customize directly. It doesn't do any of those things directly. It just renders manifests, and then it passes those over to a separate component, which then applies those manifests and does diffing with those manifests against a Kubernetes cluster. Now, by default, we support Helm, regular manifest, customize, I think JSON. There's some other ones that are supported out of the box that it will render. But what if you want to do something beyond what Argo CD normally does? Well, there's an option for that. They're called config management plugins. And this basically allows you to attach any kind of sidecar container onto the repo server that is rendering manifests to run arbitrary commands that you have pre-selected. Now, you can do stuff, for example, I built a library of these. And one of the examples that I did is I actually built a plugin for Helm that would render the Helm chart against a Kubernetes cluster so it could do Helm value lookups, which normally Argo CD doesn't do. Now, maybe you shouldn't do that in general because it kind of breaks the model of Argo CD because you're rendering your manifest in the same place that you're talking to a cluster if you would do that. But that's my option. I can kind of do anything with the config management plugin. You can actually erase the manifest and bring in different manifests. You can inject secrets. There's a popular pattern that has developed where people will actually inject secrets into manifests from like a from a secret store. Now, we actually recommend against doing that kind of pattern. We don't want you to inject secrets into those manifests. But the point is that config management plugins provide a huge amount of flexibility to decide how you render your manifests, what options you want to do, if you want to inject extra values, if you want to look up extra things. Because it's just running a container as a sidecar, you can kind of do anything you want. So that's a great option. If you're running into anything that is stopping you with Argo CD from getting the manifest the way that you want to, or supporting, maybe you have inside of your company your own custom DSL that you're using to develop Kubernetes manifests. Now, by all means, we might argue about the wisdom of doing any one of those things, but if you need to do them, if you absolutely have to, config management plugins are a way that you can completely change the behavior of Argo CD manifest handling without changing anything inside of Argo CD. So check out config management plugins. I'll throw a link in the show notes to some examples in Argo Project Labs. There is a project there, CMP plugins library under Argo Project Labs, for those of you that are interested in that. So with that, we're going to have Ruby-Tal come on. She doesn't have a ton of time today, so she's only going to give us the update on Argo CD 3.2, and then she's piecing out of here. So Ruby-Tal, what do you have new with Argo CD 3.2? You wrote a blog post for it, and we'd love to hear what some of your insights were.
So what's new in Argo CD 3.2? We might have talked about it a little bit. And 3.2 is officially GA'd. Actually, we're working on 3.3, which is on track to be GA next month. But this time, I've started a bit of a new tradition. So with every release, I will try and create a small piece of content that basically highlights the journey behind the release process. This time, let me scroll down here. You can see this video by Nitish, which was the release champion for 3.2. And he's sharing his experience with this release, what went well, what was more challenging, and what made this release so special to Nitish. So first of all, thank you, Nitish. And stay tuned for the next video for 3.3 by Peter, hopefully. And let's jump onto the content. So I'm super excited about the Argo CD UX. And that's why I've chosen to highlight some of the new AI changes that were part of this release. So the first one is the hydration status. It's now shown on the application tile. I'm not sure that you can actually see it because it's not very high quality image, but you can see here the status of the hydration status. So this one is for the users that actually uses the hydrator feature. The applications page now shows the hydration status. Previously, you needed to go to the app details and to check whether the hydration is in progress or not. Right now, 3 states were actually added: the hydrating, the hydrated, and failed status. Super easy and super easy to manage. Second feature that I've chose to talk about is the sortable columns in the application list. You can see right now, I think that you could sort only based on the status. I might be wrong, but not all of the columns were, you could sort the applications across. So right now, the application table supports sorting across all of the major columns. And it might look like a little tweak, but really when you need to manage hundreds of applications, it makes your life way, way, way easier. So this one is about the column list. Another feature that was added to the UX is the connection state message. You can see that you have a new page that contains all of the details about the connection state. Before, you could go and hover on the in the application and see the small window. Right now, it has a dedicated window, which is much easier to navigate and to manage. I'll continue to scroll down. Don't have anything smart to say about those. Application set. So there are basically new status logs that were added. Basically, it makes the logging and the debugging experience much more easy and convenient. The application set tracks and reports status changes from now on. So previously it was silently change, and if you wanted to understand what's going on, it was a bit complicated. Right now there are logs for whenever the status has changed, or a step has changed, or a message was updated. You can actually track the log and see that as part of the logs. A few more changes that I would like to go through. The server side diff. So Argo CD 3.2 now supports server-side diffing. Before that, the diffing was on the client side. This time, from now on, it's going to be supported within the server side. And I think it requires a whole new episode to talk only about that. But I must say, I attended the ArgoCon in Atlanta. There was an amazing session by Andrew and Gerald about what the diff. It was about exactly this feature, and you can see the link to the session. So you're more than welcome to watch it. And I think that's about it. Feel free to go ahead and deep dive and read a little bit about it. Watch Nitish's video. Stay tuned for the next video. And if you guys have anything else you would like to add or to share, Dan, feel free to do that.
All right, thanks, Ravital. And again, Argo CD 3.2 is available today. You're welcome to go and use it. And of course, we're already working on Argo CD 3.3, so stay tuned because we got lots of new features coming there. Now, excuse me. Now, let me bring on our guests. First of all, we've got Kostis, who has been a co-host in the past And obviously, everybody knows Kostis for his expertise in Argo and GitOps and best practices. Kostis, I have it on good authority from people. They sometimes don't say we follow GitOps. They just say we follow Kostis.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you. And then, yeah, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that, yes, I'm also a big fan of the show. I'm also working at Octopus with Dan, and I'm also a member of the Argo team, focusing on Argo rollouts. That's my big love. But yes, also Argo CD. I love both projects. Okay, now I'm done.
Perfect. Thank you, Kostis. We're also going to bring in Luke. Luke, you've been on the show a couple of times. Power Argo user, have contributed a number of times to the project. And of course, you've spoken at ArgoCon probably 3 or 4 times now at KubeCon, and a thought leader in your own right.
Yeah, thank you for having me again. It's great to be back and great to see you all again, and looking forward to the discussion today. And as well, I'm glad that I was able to bring a friend along as well today.
Yeah, bringing along Ben Powell. Now, Ben, you are a CDEvents maintainer. You're working at Apple, and really glad to have you contributing to open source and leading out a project like that. And you guys today are going to be talking about the case for bringing CDEvents into Argo CD. But before we get to that, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, as you said, I'm Ben Powell, and I am an active maintainer of the CDEvents project. I've been a maintainer for a couple of years now, and then also, as Dan had said, I work at Apple, and I work on the Spinnaker project. So it's an open source CD delivery system, kind of similar to Argo, but less focused. Well, it can do GitOps, but less focused on that. But I primarily contributed efficiencies optimizations for Spinnaker. But that's been my primary role at Apple, along with being a CDEvents maintainer, which we just released 0.5. So I just wanted to shout that out.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so we're going to get all into that. Before we do, any reactions to Argo CD 3.2, any features that you guys are excited about in particular? And I've got a couple that I have in mind.
Yeah, I will start. It's not like a specific feature. I just like to see always improvements about application sets. Application sets is one of my favorite features, if anybody has seen my previous presentations. And usually when I find people that are not using application sets, they complain because they say application sets are like magic. I run something and it generates something, and I don't know how to debug it or to understand it. So any point, where we say application sets are complex is bad experience. And anytime we have a feature that helps you understand how application sets work and what they do is a big plus for me. So adding the preview function in the CLI in a previous Argo CD version was great. Now I see more features about, the errors and the performance. So application sets, we love them.
Yeah, there's going to be new debug messages for what application sets are doing, when they're generating applications, when they're successful, when they've failed. All that's going to be in the logs from now on. Also, profiling support for application sets. So if you need to debug CPU spikes or analyze reconciliation times that are associated with that, that's going to be a big deal, really important. And then the other one that you touched on was the concurrency and queuing, faster reconciliation times. That's going to be awesome. Any other things that you guys are excited about for 3.2?
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of the same comments, seeing those performance improvements, a lot of the more deep debugging and details coming out of application sets. I think certainly for all of us on the call here that have different affinities and have enjoyed application sets, I was kind of thinking with these new performance metrics and debugging tools, it's kind of, Dan, you and I did a talk on how to, all the bad things you could do with applications.
Yeah.
And kind of explode them out and kind of put them in infinite loops and such. Like, what if we redid that talk again with these profiling tools? What could we see? Like, what kind of damage did we get? Now we have numbers to go with it.
Yeah, that's true. We could give a lot more data on the chaos that we were creating. And Ben, any that you want to call out?
Yeah, I think for me, specifically looking at the release notes, it's the pprof, the profiling, mostly because when you think of like different services and different tools, like observabilities, I always felt like has always been a second Like it always happens second when it should be like one of the first things that you add for a service to really measure the like the bottlenecks that a particular thing might be causing. Maybe it's a pipeline, maybe it's a particular piece of code that was just introduced, and having that like as a first class citizen in under application sets is, I think, a really good release, and it's something that I strive for everyone is to have more observability. So I really like seeing that.
Yeah, that's going to be great. The only other one that I'll call out is the new health metrics for Datadog metrics. Now, whatever we think about Datadog, the point that I think is cool about this is that custom resources in Kubernetes don't have a normal health mechanism that is super clear about what's going on with those resources. Now, people can add things, they can finagle around it, but in general, Kubernetes doesn't necessarily have an understanding of health of custom resources in the way that we would think of it, that we have for like pods or deployments. But Argo CD, because we are tracking the status of all these resources, people have added hundreds and hundreds of custom resource definition health status checks that allow us to give much better information about the status of those different resources. And so it's this kind of ended up in this being this feature that if you actually really want to understand what's happening with your Kubernetes cluster, you almost have to be using Argo CD because it has these cool health checks for all of these different CRDs, and they're really easy to write. They're very simple format. So if you wanted to add your own, if you have your own CRD and you want to have Argo CD report on the health status of that in a unique way to that CRD, go and do it. This Datadog one, again, that one's from like, it wasn't, I don't even think it was contributed by Datadog. It was just a Datadog end user who said, hey, I want to have better reporting on this resource. And so they added that support. But I love those. Those are really easy pull requests to approve, and we go through them really, really quickly. So if you're thinking of contributing something there, that's a great place to start.
Well, speaking of Datadog, if anyone works at Datadog, I have a pull request open with Datadog about tracking Argo CD metrics better, some enhancements there. So please, someone look at that pull request. And likewise, I have a corresponding pull request in Argo CD to improve the documentation for Argo's metrics. There's Datadog's documentation for Argo CD's metrics are probably secretly the best place for Argo docs about Argo metrics.
Wow.
So
well, Luke, send me a link, and I want to check out that pull request right after this and see if we can get it merged before the weekend.
So yeah, if you combine these both, there's a lot of great information there.
Sure. Fantastic. And then anything that you guys wanted to add on CMP plugins before we jump into today's topic?
Don't use them.
I figured that would be what you said, Kostis. It's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't use them. That's the thing, is that CMP plugins let you basically do anything, but 99% of the time you probably shouldn't be doing those things. So for example, the one that I talked about, the Helm value lookups, like you really shouldn't use Helm value lookups. So I haven't like gone and made that plugin super pretty. It was just more of a proof of concept to show that you could do it. But yeah, you're
do you think with like the rendered manifest pattern out there for GitOps that people will pull more of that workflow for rendered manifest? They might pull it more into Argo in a CMP kind of thing. And then you might have like the future best patterns for rendered manifest could evolve, change here based on what people might build for other CMPs.
Oh, I totally think that we will see some people do that. You're totally right. But when it comes to rendering manifests, what should you be doing beyond just Helm template or customize build? Like probably nothing, right? Like if you just build your Helm chart or your customization well, then you probably don't need to be doing anything else. I know some people are doing kookier, crazier stuff, but definitely like the one that we see the most often, which is the most egregious, is injecting secrets into the manifests that are rendered. And that's like with the rendered manifest pattern, that would be even worse, right? It's like, okay, now you're committing those secrets to Git. Why even bother? It's not going to be a better situation that way. and looking at values probably could be using config maps better or things like that that are going to provide those kinds of components. I know some people want to have like that completely dry manifest experience where on paper, I get it. I've got a bunch of values on my cluster. I'll just keep my Helm chart completely generic. I deploy it to the cluster and it's going to look up values for the environment and it's going to be automatically generated. On paper, that sounds nice, but it's not a great pattern. And again, you're taking components that easily break out of the Git loop. So now you are missing your audit trail for them.
That's next episode. We can.
Let me add something, because if anybody from our listeners is coming to KubeCon Amsterdam, there is a talk, GitOps Secrets, by me, where we'll talk about all the bad practices and the best practices for secrets, especially after the release of Argo CD version 3, where if you have seen the documentation page for secrets, it has changed. So previously, Argo CD said you can do whatever you want. Now, finally, we have some strong opinions. And if you have seen any of my previous presentations, you know I like to do controversial topics. So I'm going to expose the whole truth for everybody. So we can discuss this either here or you should come to my presentation.
That's a good headline. Kostis is going to expose the truth that they don't want you to know. They don't want you to know that you're not supposed to be abusing secrets and using them poorly, whoever they are.
One thing that I think might be interesting, I don't know if you all think this might be like a potential feature then, like, because like when I hear this, I'm like, maybe this is a particular feature, or maybe you guys are already thinking about it. I don't know, but like you had said, you know, secrets, you don't want to commit those to Git, right? So is there a potential, like maybe you inject something like a reference to that secret, then when Argo pulls it in, it knows how to, like, you know, fetch it and you know, do whatever it is, or is that already a concept like with the config maps? I'm guessing is probably the more
amazing. You just described how the external secret provider works.
Okay, great. Okay.
You have an external secret which doesn't hold a secret by itself. It has a reference to your HashiCorp vault or whatever you're using for secrets.
Perfect.
And then it fetches the secret and puts it in the cluster. But what Argo CD is dealing with and what is stored in Git doesn't have any secret information at all. And it supports many backends that you can use.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
One step
And
ahead.
it's completely passed through to Argo CD. Argo CD doesn't have to care about external secrets at all. That's all happening cluster side and is separated. And I think some people do, to your point, Ben, get in trouble with infrastructure stuff that they're setting up with like Terraform, and then they're trying to figure out how to get those references into manifests. And that's one where it's like 90% of the time those things are not secret and they probably should just be committed to Git. And then otherwise they can be referenced using secrets where appropriate. So
Makes sense.
all right. So thanks for your reactions to that. Let's get into this CD events coming into Argo CD. So Kostis, introduce for us this topic, and then I'm sure Ben and Luke are going to have a lot to say about it.
Yeah. I want to give all the listeners some context. Luke actually came to me last year and said, let's do a great presentation at KubeCon. And I said, amazing. What is the topic? And he said, it's CDEvents. And I have to admit, it's the first ever time, I heard about CDEvents. And I said to myself, if Luke is looking at this, it must be important, because he always chooses, good topics. So we did the presentation, and I had to read myself, what CDEvents is, how it works, what are the advantages. And then Luke also did another presentation at GitOpsCon for the same topic, if I remember correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And then we said that's a great topic for Argo Unpacked. But I don't want, me to talk about CDEvents. We said, let's bring an expert. Do we know an expert? And happily, Luke said, I know a guy. And this is how Ben joined us today. So Ben is the expert here, and Luke, not me. I'm just going to introduce them. But essentially, first of all, there is a recording already, 2 or 3 recordings specifically on how CDEvents work with Argo CD. The main idea is that CDEvents, as the name suggests, is a generic event mechanism, which if you are a developer, you should have already seen, with other patterns and buses and microservices, where instead of going and notifying somebody, do this, do that, do whatever you want to do, you just emit an event and you say, me, my service, I did that. And I notify whoever needs to be notified. And then it's up to them to do whatever they want. They can also emit events on their own. So I can wait, back and see if something has finished, then I can do something. But the end result is that you get a nice architecture where nothing actually knows everybody else. Every communication is happening via events. And this is very flexible, very scalable. And I think it's also, let's say, the same recipe that you hold as a developer. Like there is a big discussion how you create an application if you work with sockets or message buses or whatever. And there is the idea that if you want something scalable, you can have many microservices communicating over a message bus. So imagine the same thing, but on an architectural level. So you can have many tools like Spinnaker, Argo CD, Jenkins, where instead of having them directly communicating, Jenkins calling another tool or Spinnaker calling another tool, you just emit an event and everybody else just monitors the event. So that's the 5-second pitch from a non-expert. And now Ben and Luke will do the real content. Make sense?
Awesome. Yeah, let me try to answer this one, Luke, because I have a pretty good understanding, and I think as well that when I first explain CD events, I always give like a analogy because it kind of helps people understand what we're trying to do. So the analogy that I typically use is the merchant analogy. So if you go back thousands of years ago, right, like merchants back in the day, like they would trade amongst just themselves, the same language, right? But as an empire expands, right, they might want to start trading with other countries or other empires that don't speak the other language, right? So this actually happened. So what did they do? Well, they created a very simple language to do transactions between these empires at basically they called them merchant bridges. They'd meet at these bridges and then trade. So that's what CDEvents is trying to do. It's just trying to have different empires or tools to be able to talk to one another in a consistent and normalized fashion. So what does that mean? Why would we want to do that is usually the question that follows up. And really, when you think about wanting to switch out another tool, let's say you're going from like GitHub to GitLabs, or you're going from Spinnaker to Argo, right? You're switching that, or maybe you need to support multiple different types of infrastructure because your consumer base, some of them use Argo, some of them use Spinnaker, some of them use something you never even heard of, right? So the goal of this is if they speak CDEvents, they'll be able just to plug into their system and just listen for the appropriate events and send the appropriate events and just work seamlessly. So that's the end goal. And along with that, you get some interesting observability aspects. So when we think of observability, we think of the whole life cycle in terms of CDEvents. And the reason for that is that's the strongest, benefit that you get. Because when you usually measure metrics, is you usually get only inside of a closed silo, like the service that you're running, or maybe in the org that you have like these particular metrics. But what if it went a little bit further than that? What if you could measure the time that a ticket was open to the exact commit that was associated with that ticket to the actual deployment? You get that full timeline of who did what, where. So you get auditing, you get those metrics, and you get to see that at a very high level of what that path looked like. So that's another thing that you get with CDEvents. So not only do you get interoperability, you get this very holistic view of all the systems that are talking with one another.
So I have a feeling that people who are hearing this for the first time are going to be saying, well, what about Argo events? Why not use Argo events? And so some people think that Argo events is embedded into Argo CD. It's not. Argo CD has its own eventing system that's for different stuff. Argo events is a separate project that people can use with Argo CD in a similar way. So what would be the advantage, or why would somebody choose one over the other?
So I think, so as the name applies with Argo events, because I don't know too much about that, but like I said, the whole goal for CDEvents is
Ben, I can help you.
Okay, awesome.
CDEvents is a specification. Argo events is an implementation. In theory, you could have both. It's not one way or the other. But I think the quick answer is that CDEvents is more generic. It can be supported by anybody. It's a specification that anybody can implement. So does that help, Ben? That
Yeah, that's. I think that based off of what you said. Okay, now I understand what Argo Events is. But yeah, that's exactly right. It's a specification that any system, as long as they're following this protocol, this specification, will be able to just use. Right. So it's not tool specific. It's it's more of a specification like HTTP, for example.
And I think Argo Events does some CDEvent standard messages already today. So there's some of that there.
Got it. Okay. Now I looked at the CDEvents website. It's cdevents.dev. And the other thing I was thinking is that when I went down and looked at the supported projects, it shows Jenkins, it shows TestCube, it shows Spinnaker and Tecton. And then it shows Argo, but Argo's logo is like grayed out. And I was trying to figure out, is that because Argo isn't as well supported, or like what's being communicated there?
I think it's supposed to be partially supported with some of the stuff, because like Spinnaker, it's like almost, I would say almost 100% supported, and it's going to be at 100% soon. So I think that's what that's trying to communicate. But like I said, I think the goal is to get, once Argo becomes more has more support for some of the specification, then we can definitely put the full logo there.
Okay, gotcha. So are there any gotchas with Argo CD? Anything that people would expect to work that isn't there right now?
That might be a lead into what I'm working on or something.
Perfect.
But that's the whole, talk that Kostis and I did at KubeCon, at ArgoCon. Leading into it was, I don't think these logos that you were mentioning, I don't even think they were there before we did our talk a couple months ago. I think these are some recent additions, and I think there's and part of both the talk I did at ArgoCon as well as GitOpsCon, kind of calling out like, hey, like for Flux and other GitOps tools, like people are starting to get their feet wet on some of the CDEvent standard messaging. And that was kind of the call that I was making to the community at large at ArgoCon, was saying, hey, let's take a look at this specification. Argo CD has the notification controller, which does standard event messaging to a variety of tools out there. It has some built-in native integrations to like Slack, to email, to generic webhooks, and a variety of other tools and things like that. But the talk that we proposed was part of the punchline of the talk was saying, hey, here's how I envision mapping the events that happen in Argo itself, like sync events and rollback events and degraded health status, things like that. It's like how these might map to CDEvent specifications. And those kind of things, and kind of putting together this, wanting to start the discussion in the community, saying, here's how I think the mapping belongs. Here's how I can manually craft this mapping with the notification controller templates in Argo CD. Here's kind of a hello world demo that we showed at the conference, and looking to kind of spark these conversations in the community, going, am I on the right path? Does this mapping make sense? And can we, if this works, let's make plans to make this kind of a more native component of Argo CD, both to send events, but also kind of to like Kostis' comments before, is like, we could also start thinking about Argo listening to these events and reacting to them as well.
So you mentioned that, and I haven't used CDEvents, and so I'm going to represent the audience that doesn't. Let me say the audience is probably smarter than me and has used it a bunch, and so I'm going to represent the ignoramuses. Kostis, you mentioned it's a specification, not an implementation. And so the first thing that I was thinking of is like, oh, if this is an eventing thing, then I hope that I have some kind of like queuing mechanism to make sure I don't lose my events. But is that even part of it because it's not an implementation?
I think this is a Ben question, but yeah. I want to say before the queuing, Maybe, Ben, you can do an intro on the types of events. I think if you explain some of the examples and the events that are already there, maybe, the audience will understand the use cases and what we're doing. At least for me, the time when the project clicked for me, when I saw the events and like the types, the different types and let's say areas. And then I said, okay, that makes sense. So maybe you can talk a bit about this more.
Yeah. So CDEvents has categories of events, CI being one of them, CD, and then there's orchestration, there's ticketing, for example. And each one of these categories has a subject and a predicate. So the subject might be like artifact.published, right? So when an artifact gets published, you would want to send that event. And anyone that's interested in listening to that event, maybe it's security, maybe they want to vet that there's no bad dependencies inside of that published artifact. That's something they would be able to listen for and then react to. Another event that a lot of people are probably more interested in are the orchestration events. These are events like pipeline run, pipeline started, pipeline finished, pipeline canceled, for example, right? And then there's the task related ones, which is just, any sort of task that doesn't really fit, the pipeline, but it does make sense. It's still some sort of orchestration. So we want to create a task for that and describe that. That's like task started, task finished, for example. And then on the CD side, we have things like, service deployed being one of them, canary analysis related ones, and then CI being, test run started, etc. So that's the category of events, and hopefully that's enough to kind of help people, put the abstract to something more concrete. And I think that will hopefully be a lot more clear. And then to follow up on Dan's question, which was I forgot, what did you ask Dan prior to that before we led into this?
I was asking about
queuing, the implementation. Right. So so for the queuing for the implementation, like I said, the primary goal is the specification. Right now we have a separate repo, which is going to be the implementations like repo, right? Where it's going to provide users with, I guess, the tool sets that would be needed to kind of like get started with CDEvents. So if you don't have, it's not saying that you have to use these tools, but it's like if you don't have like an event bus system, we will have the correct architecture that you could just hopefully just as a Docker image just drop in and run it. So that is happening, but it's an ongoing process. And then we also have SDKs which help send these events as well. So yeah, that portion is already there, so you can look at it. But the implementation in terms of the architecture right now, that's just mostly docs, and we have a separate team that's actually looking at implementing as well.
Got it. Okay. Now looking at the spec for like CDEvents, because Kostis was mentioning those, I'm seeing stuff like environment updated, environment deleted, service updated, service modified, that kind of stuff. I imagine that, when I first thought about it, I figured, okay, this is really about an orchestration problem that we're solving where we're triggering different things. But as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking this would be really useful for auditing and having something that is continually updating and sending these events just so that I know when services were modified. I know when environments were modified. Now, ideally, maybe I'm using Argo CD to do everything. And so if I see an event that doesn't have a corresponding change from Argo CD, that's when my antenna really go up. Has somebody implemented like a controller that sits cluster side that automatically just publishes out these events when appropriate, or is it more granular than that?
Yeah, so right now we have this webhook publisher that intercepts both Jenkins and GitHub. So you can add like inside of like GitHub, like a webhook, it will send the GitHub event and then convert that to a CD event. So we do have something like that. But like I said, we're still at the early phases. We're not even in 1.0 yet, but the end goal is to have something there that people will be able to use long term.
There's like a distributed approach to this that is what got my interest into this. And Dan, as the concerned audience member, I should tell you about the problems I was trying to solve when I got kind of drawn to CDEvents.
Yeah.
And so many times. And I think we've seen these discussions. If you look at one of my first ArgoCon presentations, actually I talked about how I deployed Argo CD at my enterprise and architectural choices. Like there's so many different patterns you can take to deploying Argo CD. And we did a hub and spoke model, part of that being driven just by the user experience. People like the Argo UI, and it's really hard to say run many instances of Argo CD, at least classically, to run many instances of Argo CD and give that one UI experience. And so we made an architectural choice based off of the user experience. Now looking at say CDEvents, where it's like if every instance of Argo, if I could instead do a distributed set of Argo CDs and every instance of Argo was emitting a standard CD event message, I could then do that auditing, create a separate dashboard in Grafana or Datadog or some other tool that now creates that unified Argo UI experience somewhere else. And kind of continuing that problem along where at my enterprise or in previous places I've worked or even currently, where rarely ever is your application delivery domain. That's another word or phrasing that I'm trying to push, and I'm trying to kill the CI/CD term because it's such like a limiting term when you look at like application delivery as a whole. If you look at like the CNCF landscape as a whole, there's a whole subsection of application delivery, which is dozens of tools, Argo CD or Jenkins or Spinnaker or so many other tools are just a small subset. To deliver software requires all of these tools, your various CI tools, your various CD tools, Argo, things like that, your artifact tools, your other logging tools, other workflow tools, things like that. And so that's been like the next challenge where I'm trying to track, kind of like Ben was saying before, is like when a ticket is created, when a commit happens, what's the whole story that happens to that work? Being able to track through the CI processes, the artifacts, the security scanning, the CD, the deployments, things like that. How do you track that whole story? I've been before like trying to chase after like, could I buy the one tool, the one vendor product that does it all and has unified all of that reporting? And there's not going to be the one perfect tool, and you kind of find yourself shoehorning in different architectural choices just try to make one other tool work. And it's like, I would rather my distributed domain of tools, all my different Argos, my different Jenkins, things like that. It's like, if they could all emit kind of these standard CD event messages, I can start now creating my dashboards and creating all my metrics and tracking and auditing around the whole experience, and not trying to chase the one perfect tool, but rather push out to the community saying, hey, if every tool just started emitting these messages, it kind of makes the whole developer experience better for all of us.
Yeah, and to expand a little bit on that, because that is when people hear CDEvents, and I list the two like benefits, which is interoperability and like observability, which is like falls under like also has auditing, for example. People are always gravitates towards the observability portion because it's something that we're very, very familiar with. And what Luke had said, right? Like, no tool, there's not one good tool that kind of like does everything, unfortunately, because they would have to write a number of integrations, right? So it gets pretty complicated pretty fast when you need to start converting it to to something, or converting one thing to another thing to make sure that they align properly. But CDEvents tries to eliminate that, so everyone speaks the same language, so it's easy to display, but also to like you were saying earlier, Dan, to audit. And the reason why, and to give back to the example of I call it the SDLC flow, the whole software development lifecycle. And when you have a commit, right? And let's say like you want to know, let's say there is a CVE, it's a really bad one. Say it's a remote execution, it's really bad. And you want to know every artifact, every commit that touched this dependency that introduced the CVE. With CDEvents, you'd be able to query it and get those exact deployments if they're still running and how long they've been running, etc. So that's the big portion of the auditing, is that you with CDEvents you're able to do things like that.
Very cool. Well, you guys have given us a really good overview. We've got a few minutes left. to kind of to wrap up here. So for next steps, you mentioned, Luke, some actions that you're working on to improve, maybe getting some of the eventing to come from Argo CD, improving some of the language between the two projects. What's next for the project? And maybe one other thing I'll ask too is, with these kinds of big standards projects, obviously the bigger names that you can bring who are backing it, who agree, who's on board. Is this the start of the revolution here, or are we already well into the wave and there's a bunch of people already adopted?
So yeah, there's definitely a few people that are using it. We use it in Spinnaker, which by default, because we have it in Spinnaker, we use it on our team at Apple. So that is a pretty big name there, right? So but yeah, there are people that are at like JP Morgan, Fidelity, so a lot of banks like to use it. Why do banks? Because auditing is such an important concept to them that they're like, CDEvents auditing. Yeah. So they really love that aspect of it. But yeah, they're among others as well that use CDEvent too. But yeah, I don't have the full list with me, but there's definitely some big names out there.
Well, maybe it's something, I mean, if we really want to get the 500-pound gorilla, the one's going to push everybody over the edge, maybe we need to get Octopus Deploy.
Maybe
for CDEvents. Maybe because we're already sitting at the intersection of all these events, maybe we pushed it over the edge. I think we could do it.
I hear Octopus is one of the top Argo contributors, and Flux already has some CDEvent capabilities. If you're feeling a little competitive here.
Oh boy! All right, Luke, you know how to push the right buttons. So yeah, what's next then for the project? And Luke, you mentioned a few things with bringing it together with Argo CD. Anything else that people should be aware of, or should they be contributing to this project?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll add mine real quick and we'll go back to Ben. For Argo CDs, where I'm trying to put in an example implementation, I have a pull request in the Argo CD project. It's more documentation, design, giving kind of an example. And I also have another repo out there for all the examples that I showed at ArgoCon. So if I can get people to look at that Argo pull request, provide their feedback, questions. So that's kind of like a more implementation detail example, giving review to that. And then Ben can certainly tell you about CDEvents. I know CDEvents just had a really big release just the other day.
Yeah, we just released 0.5, which has a bunch of things that we are trying to get right. So we've made a few breaking changes because we realized if we do it this way, we're being in a lot of trouble when we go to 1.0. So what we decided is, okay, if we're going to make breaking changes, let's break all the breaking changes in 0.5. So we only break people once for the really big stuff. And then once they get over that hurdle, things should be a lot smoother for them. So that's the big one. Another thing I want to mention as well is that, so we're on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/CDEvents, you'll see all the repos, the specifications under spec. And we also have a working group. So every Tuesday, we have both a Europe working group and an Americas working group. So it happens at, I think, 12 o'clock CST at Americas, and then 9 o'clock CST on Tuesday as well. So every Tuesday that happens, and absolutely, we're always willing to take any sort of contributions, even questions. Just getting to know the project is always welcomed. We have people coming in and out, seeing if the solutions work for them. We have people just asking questions, stopping by the Slack channel that we have as well, and they're just coming in and out. So yeah, we welcome people with open arms, and the more people that we have, because this is a specification across all tools, we want to make sure that we generalize in a way that isn't too far to one direction, but also good enough to be useful, but also captures the necessary subject that we can. And what I mean by subject, I mean pipelines, right? And then like tickets, right? But you might have a concept that we haven't covered yet that we might not even have thought about, that unless you come in and actually tell us about it. So we're always open, and we're always happy to have those discussions.
Awesome. Well, very exciting. I think it's really cool and beneficial for people to adopt these events And I really appreciate that you guys have done the work to help establish a standard for how these things can be done, because every organization needs this kind of stuff. And 10 million people reinventing the wheel over and over again does not a happy picture make. So I like that we're bringing that functionality to Argo CD. Luke, thanks for your efforts there. And Kostis for going and speaking about it and getting people involved, and Ben for maintaining the project. So well done, and excited to see more. And yeah, maybe let's chat some more about how we can get Octopus Deploy involved, because once we bring the blue octopus, that's when the real muscle, everything is going to change.
For sure.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining another episode of Argo Unpacked. Of course, we're going to be back in 2 weeks. We got more guests coming up. Remember, go to argounpacked.com. Subscribe. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on social media, X, Blue Sky, whatever. We publish our podcasts, of course, so you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you're good to go. So thanks for coming to another episode of Argo Unpacked. Stay synced, everyone.